The first thing I heard was, "You don't have to disappear anymore." Those words stopped me in the middle of a rainy sidewalk, spoken by someone I had never met, yet they landed with the weight of a lifetime. I looked over my shoulder, certain they were meant for someone else. But the stranger was smiling at me, not with pity, not with curiosity, just quiet understanding. In that moment, the little paper shopping bag hidden beneath my jacket suddenly felt heavier than it ever had before. Inside, it was a simple blue dress. I had bought it 3 months earlier. I had never worn it. Every weekend, I promised myself that this would finally be the day, only to fold it back into its tissue paper before anyone could ever see it. The dress had become more than fabric. It had become a mirror of every choice I refused to make. So when that stranger said, "You don't have to disappear anymore," something cracked inside me. I wish I could tell you I walked confidently into a brighter future after that. I didn't. I went home. I locked the door. I placed the shopping bag back into the top shelf of my closet, and I cried harder than I had in years. Not because I hated myself, because I was exhausted. Exhausted from pretending I never wondered what life would feel like if I stopped hiding the softer parts of myself. Exhausted from rehearsing conversations that never happened. Exhausted from convincing everyone, including myself, that curiosity and self-expression were things I could simply outgrow. The blue dress waited in silence. Days became weeks. Every morning I walked past my bedroom mirror without really looking into it. Mirrors had become strange things. They reflected exactly who I was expected to be, but never the person I imagined when my mind wandered. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a dramatic message or some life-changing invitation, just a flyer from a local creative community group. Volunteer today, help someone feel seen. There were no speeches, no expectations, just an open invitation for people who wanted to encourage others through art, conversation, and kindness. Something about it reminded me of the stranger's voice. Maybe people really could help each other stop disappearing. I almost deleted it. Instead, I registered. The first meeting was held in an old community center filled with paintings, handmade crafts, and mismatched chairs that looked older than I was. Everyone introduced themselves with stories instead of job titles. One person restored old furniture. Another painted landscapes after losing a loved one. Someone else knitted scarves for hospitals. When it was finally my turn, I froze. I whispered. Nothing came out. No one rushed me. No one laughed. One volunteer simply slid a small hand mirror across the table. "Whenever you're ready," she said. The room fell quiet. I looked into the mirror. For the first time in years, I didn't immediately look away. That tiny mirror became my unexpected companion. Every morning afterward, I forced myself to hold it for just 10 seconds. At first, all I noticed were flaws, tired eyes, nervous expressions, uncertainty. But slowly, I began noticing possibilities instead. The blue dress came down from the closet, not to wear outside, just to hold, just to feel its fabric without guilt, just to stop pretending it didn't exist. I stood before my bedroom mirror one quiet evening, holding the dress against myself. No makeup, no costume, no performance, just me, imagining what honesty might feel like. And for the first time, my reflection didn't seem like a stranger. It looked like someone patiently waiting for permission to become whole. The next morning, I carried the little hand mirror to the window instead of leaving it hidden in my drawer. Sunlight spilled across the glass, and for a brief moment my reflection looked softer, not because anything about my face had changed, but because the expression staring back at me finally carried a trace of hope. The blue dress was still folded neatly across my bed. It no longer felt like evidence. It felt like a promise. I made myself one simple commitment. Every evening after work, I would spend 10 honest minutes with myself. No pretending. No rehearsing someone else's expectations. Just quiet reflection. The first evening, I carefully slipped into the dress. My hands trembled so badly that I almost gave up halfway through. When I finally stood before the mirror, my heart pounded louder than the rain tapping against my window. I expected embarrassment. Instead, I felt something far more surprising. Relief. Not because I believed I had become someone different overnight, but because I had stopped arguing with myself for those few precious minutes. The mirror no longer accused me. It listened. Days turned into weeks, and those 10 minutes slowly stretched into entire evenings spent reading, journaling, or listening to old songs while dressed in the quiet privacy of my room. The fear didn't disappear, but it stopped making every decision for me. At the volunteer center, something else was changing. People began recognizing me, not for what I wore, but for how I listened. A teenager struggling with confidence asked how I always stayed so calm. I almost laughed. If only they knew the storms I carried home every night. I just try to remember that everyone is fighting a battle nobody else can see, I answered. Those words surprised even me. Perhaps I had been speaking to myself all along. One afternoon, the organizer announced a community art exhibition. Every volunteer was invited to contribute something that represented personal growth. Others immediately began planning paintings, poems, and sculptures. I had nothing, or so I thought. That evening, I unfolded the blue dress again. Beside it lay the small hand mirror. Two ordinary objects, yet together they told the story of every silent battle I had fought. An idea slowly formed. Instead of creating something elaborate, I framed the mirror inside a simple wooden border. Around its edges, I wrote tiny handwritten phrases collected from my journal over the past months. Breathe. You are still here. Kindness begins with yourself. Stop disappearing. At the very bottom, almost too small to notice, I wrote one final sentence. The person in this reflection deserves patience. When exhibition day arrived, my hand shook as I carried the framed mirror inside. People walked past quietly. Some smiled. Others paused for several minutes. One older gentleman stood before it for so long that I wondered if something was wrong. Finally, he looked at me with tears in his eyes. I've spent years avoiding mirrors, he admitted softly. Today, I looked. He didn't ask why I had made it. He didn't ask what it meant. He simply thanked me. That single conversation stayed with me long after everyone had gone home. For years, I believed my journey was only about hiding. Now I realized it could also become about helping. Not by telling people who they should become, but by reminding them they didn't have to face themselves alone. Walking home that evening, I caught my reflection in a store window. For once, I didn't hurry past it. I smiled. A small smile. A real one. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from the volunteer coordinator. Would you be willing to mentor someone new? They remind me a little of how you were when you first arrived. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Months earlier, I had arrived believing I needed someone to save me. Now, someone believed I could help another person find the courage to stop hiding. I looked down at the blue dress folded carefully inside my bag, then at the little mirror reflecting the evening sky. For the first time, they no longer symbolized fear. They symbolized responsibility, and I knew that saying yes would change far more than my own story. I read the message at least a dozen times before answering. Then I typed a single word. Yes. The reply felt impossibly small compared to what it meant. I wasn't agreeing to be an expert. I wasn't claiming to have everything figured out. I was simply admitting that the path I'd walked, hesitant, uncertain, and often lonely, might help someone else take their own first step. A week later, I arrived at the community center earlier than usual. The familiar hallway, once intimidating, now felt strangely comforting. Paintings still lined the walls. The old wooden floor still creaked beneath every step. The kettle still whistled in the little kitchen as volunteers prepared tea before everyone arrived. Some places don't change. People do. The coordinator greeted me with a warm smile. Your partner is a little nervous. I couldn't help laughing. So was I. She nodded knowingly. I remember. Those two words reminded me how far I'd come. The person waiting for me sat alone near the window, quietly turning a paper cup between their hands. Their shoulders were tense. Their eyes stayed fixed on the floor, as though making eye contact might reveal too much. I recognized that posture immediately. I'd lived in it for years. I sat across from them. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. Sometimes silence is simply trust waiting to arrive. Finally, they whispered, I almost didn't come. I know. You do. I almost didn't come either the first time. Their eyes lifted for the first time. There was surprise there, and relief. We spent the next hour talking, not about clothes or appearances, but about fear. About the exhausting effort of constantly trying to match everyone else's expectations. About how loneliness can exist even in a crowded room. About how difficult it is to believe you deserve kindness when you've spent years denying it to yourself. When our conversation ended, they hesitated before standing. I thought I was the only one. I smiled. I thought that too. As they walked away, I noticed something familiar tucked inside their backpack. A carefully folded shopping bag. I didn't ask what was inside. Some journeys deserve privacy until their owner is ready to share them. Months passed. The seasons quietly changed. The blue dress no longer stayed hidden on the top shelf of my closet. It rested neatly alongside the rest of my clothes, not because it defined me, but because I no longer felt the need to hide a meaningful part of myself from my own reflection. The little hand mirror changed too. The handwritten words around its frame had begun to fade from being held so often. Instead of replacing them, I added new ones. Keep growing. Offer patience. Listen first. Courage multiplies when shared. One evening, after another volunteer gathering, I stayed behind to help tidy the room. While stacking chairs, I noticed someone standing before the framed mirror from the exhibition. It was the same older gentleman who had stopped there months earlier. He smiled when he saw me. "I bought a mirror for my home," he said. I smiled back. "Do you still avoid looking into it?" He shook his head. "Not anymore." As he walked away, I realized something remarkable. The mirror had never really been about me. It had become a place where people gave themselves permission to be honest. That realization stayed with me as I stepped outside into the cool evening air. The city hadn't changed. Cars still hurried by. Streetlights still reflected on rain-soaked pavement. People still rushed home carrying invisible stories. But I wasn't rushing anymore. I paused in front of a storefront window. Months ago, I would have lowered my head and walked past. Now I stopped. I saw someone who had once believed they needed rescuing. Instead, they had learned something far more powerful. Sometimes being saved doesn't happen because one extraordinary person changes your life. Sometimes it begins with one kind sentence, one patient conversation, one volunteer willing to sit beside someone who feels invisible, and one ordinary mirror that finally reflects not who the world expects you to be, but the quiet courage it took to stop hiding. As I continued walking home, I passed the same street corner where a stranger had once looked at me and said, "You don't have to disappear anymore." This time, there was no stranger waiting. There didn't need to be. I had finally become the voice I once needed to hear.